This week, President Trump goes to the wall.
But getting over the top is easy. These are like professional mountain climbers. They're incredible climbers. They can't climb some of these walls.
And as the immigration debate rages from California to Florida, why the person caught in the middle is the cop on the corner.
In Volusia County, I'm 38 deputies down. I have a shortage in my courthouse and I have a shortage on the road. I'm having a hard time providing basic police services, let alone if you have to go out and do the federal government's job, which I don't believe that that's what our job is.
A Florida sheriff tells me about the myths surrounding immigrant crime and what community safety really means. From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani with Only in America. Sheriff Michael Chitwood, a 30-year law enforcement veteran, isn't afraid to speak out about the challenges he faces as sheriff of Volusia County, Florida, a county the size of Rhode Island. We began our conversation talking about the pressure he faces from the Trump administration to arrest the undocumented.
The northwest portion of our county is a little town called Pearson, Florida. Pearson probably has 600 or 700 residents in it, but however, it generates tens of millions upon millions of dollars into the economy because it's the largest fern-producing area in the United States of America. And it depends largely on migrant farm workers, in particular folks from Mexico working the fields. Without that work, the fields, the farmers would cease to exist. You have business people that did not want their businesses destroyed by constant pressure from law enforcement to come in there and go into the fields and check papers and cards and set up roadblocks. And quite frankly, I agreed. Having spent 18 years with the Philadelphia Police Department, our hands were filled policing the normal urban daily crimes, let alone have the task of having immigration thrown on top of you, which I don't believe is what municipal law enforcement is responsible for. Our job is to build relationships, protect the community, give a voice to those who don't have a voice, and ensure that the laws are enforced fairly. In Volusia County, I'm 38 deputies down. I have a shortage in my courthouse and I have a shortage on the road. I'm having a hard time providing basic police services, let alone if you have to go out and do the federal government's job, which I don't believe that that's what our job is.
So this is the core of the conversation here, because this administration has really, and even, I could argue even the previous administration. I mean, this is an issue, I think, from both the Republican and Democratic perspective, where there is this assumption that local law enforcement should be taking on increased immigration responsibilities. And I am, across the country, we see how this plays out with voters, where there's, an assumption that if you have a badge, you should be enforcing federal immigration law. You talked about the stress in terms of your deputies, your resources. How do you make this case to the public? Because, the public, like I said, they assume that, as law enforcement, immigration law falls under your jurisdiction.
There's also a part of fear in politics, or politics of fear, where you create an enemy, whether the enemy exists or not, and then you use that to hammer your point home. In Pearson, Florida, everybody that we arrest in that section is homegrown Floridians who are committing burglaries, selling drugs, who are sexually assaulting children. I'm going to throw a number out, and it's I didn't research this myself. I think it is 6, and that number is in the last 2 to 3 years. The number of folks who we've come across who have committed a crime or here illegally was 6. The last one I could remember was a car stop where the guy had a pound of meth in the car and he was here illegally. And nobody wants that person in our community. The immigrant community doesn't want it, and we don't want it. And you'll do everything you can to get that person out. On the flip side of that, we have a story. I have 3 deputies that work for me, the Galarza brothers. Their mother and father came here illegally in the 80s. Those 3 young men went to our schools and our colleges, and all 3 are now deputies in this organization. Their parents have since gotten their immigration status straightened out, but they came here to do exactly what their sons did, to provide them with a better life and an education and not be working in the fields as they work still to this day.
I was just going to ask you about the need for you to diversify your force. I was talking to Sheriff Margaret Mims out of Fresno County in the Central Valley of California a couple of years ago, and she talked. I mean, it's also just a massive geography that her department covers, but she was talking about just the diversity within her county and really a focus on her part to diversify her staff, her deputies. Do you feel that same need and that same pressure as you're moving forward?
You can't, yeah, absolutely. You can't police it if you don't understand it. And to give you an anecdotal story, I have a young lady that works for me. She's named Crystal Bustamante. She came to the United States with her parents from Mexico when she was about 7. She got hired by the county out of high school and worked as a civilian employee. Once her citizenship status was, she was a permanent U.S. citizen, she then became a deputy. When she goes into I could go to Pearson, Florida, which I do, and through an interpreter speak on Sunday, speak to the congregations or go to different things. And the folks will clap politely, but clearly there's a language barrier there, and there's a lack of trust. When Crystal talks, she speaks from coming here at 7 years old. She speaks about going through the process. She speaks about how she believes the community was isolated, and she speaks about how her being there can bring all these different opportunities in. And she gets a standing ovation when she speaks, because there's that relatability there that, hey, there's somebody like me, and look at what they're doing now. And now they're into this, they come back to this community and they're trying to bring services to us to help us feel that we are welcomed into this community.
So then what's happening, whether it's at the federal level, but also at in Tallahassee in Florida, when you have state legislators starting to move legislation that, again, is kind of putting the pressure on you to take on immigration enforcement responsibilities. How does that play out in terms of this relationship that's built so much on trust?
Well, I think you got to look at the broader picture here. If you look at the terrorism that's going on in Great Britain, for example, it's not people coming across their borders and doing bombings for the most part. For the most part, they're kids that were born in Britain, were marginalized and shoved out of the way of mainstream society, and now their revenge on the British government is that they're extremists. And I think if you look through every other country in the world, where is extremism born? It's born when you shove a certain segment of the population off into a corner where you persecute it and you keep out of mainstream society, and then you have crime issues. I mean, think of the ghettos in America. You put the Italians in one place, you had the Italian mafia. You put the Irish in one place, you had the Irish mafia. It's human nature is you're going to survive outside of the norms of society. Why not bring those folks in to the norms of society? Because the overwhelming majority of these folks want to be good United States citizens.
So then from a law enforcement perspective, whether it was, you as chief in, Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, Oklahoma, or Daytona, or your current role, what are the ways that you've seen that most successful in terms of, bringing immigrant youth into society?
The youth that are here now, the number one, their whole understanding of the United States of America is the school system. And we have a pretty good school system in place, especially up in Pearson, Florida. You have a lot of folks up there. They're teachers and coaches that speak Spanish. So, obviously when the kids come to school, they're speaking English, and they go home, they speak to their parents in Spanish. And they're I think the biggest impact on their positive impact on the young folks' lives is the schools. And our school resource officers play a huge role in that as well. Our school resource officers are there trying to solve problems, looking for ways to better partner and better assimilate these families. But I think it's a disgrace that the federal government hasn't done anything for 50 plus years. We're still operating under an antiquated system, and nobody's got the guts to say, hey, you have all of these millions and millions of people that are in the United States. Let's figure out a way to assimilate them into society, because they're not getting arrested. They're not gang members. They're not shooting people in the head in Pearson, Florida. That's not happening. The crime rate there is very, very low, and the people that we are arresting are the local yokels.
One of the big parts of this debate is around sanctuary cities. And I feel like, you and your colleagues are always drawn right into the middle of that debate. And I mean, it's clear that, there is no legal definition of a sanctuary city. But how do you explain, to your constituents, much less the immigrant community, what is your role when it comes to immigration enforcement, just to dispel people the notion that, Volusia County is a sanctuary county?
If you commit a crime, no matter who you are, we are going to come after you and prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. If we make an arrest in the individual that had a pound of methamphetamine or cocaine in his car, and you discover that that person is here, they're undocumented or whatever the case may be, we are going to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. That's first and foremost. If they commit a burglary, if you come into our radar screen, we're going to do what we need to do and follow the letter of the law. On the flip side, I am not going to go into the fields and check people's paperwork. I am not going to do a driver's license roadblock and stop and check people's driver's licenses coming in and out of Pearson. And I think when you talk to most of the folks up there, they want the same thing. They don't want criminals, violent criminals, drug dealers, people producing child pornography. They don't want them. And I mean, the immigrant community, don't want that as part of their community either. They even though they're living in the shadows, they want to be safe. And I have to know, I guess, to get to the cut to the chase, I have to know if one of their children is being exploited. I have to know if they're a victim of domestic abuse. I have to know if they're a victim of sexual abuse. That is a human rights issue. And that's what law enforcement's job is. In my opinion, law enforcement's job is to protect those who are the most vulnerable members of our society.
What kind of gives you hope and what worries you when it comes to the immigrant community in Volusia County?
What worries me most is that we lose common sense in our zest and zeal to demonize people. And I think we saw it down here in Florida with a video that shows a clearly person of like maybe I'm going to say South American or Mexican descent who walks up and shoots a white girl in the head on a college campus. Clearly, that is politics of fear. And that's not what we see in Volusia County. I've been here 10 and a half years as the police chief and my second year as the sheriff. And of all the murders that we've had, not one was committed by somebody who was in Volusia County illegally. Not one. But yet there's a commercial out there that when you watch it as a political ad, it automatically says Florida's unsafe because you have all of these murders being committed by undocumented people. And in this county, we don't see that. In this county, like I said, 6 people in the last 2 or 3 years that we've arrested. And when we're talking arrests, we're talking over 30,000 arrests are made in this county in a year between the sheriff's office, Daytona Beach Police Department, and the other 11 departments. You're talking 30,000 arrests. And you don't see, hear, or read that all of these illegal immigrants in Volusia County are out there rape, robbing, and pillaging. Now, again, I'm not Texas. I'm not Arizona. We're just in our small aspect of the world. It doesn't make sense that you would pick out a race and say this race is nothing but criminals, or this race is lazy, or this race does this. Because I've been up in those fields, and I have to tell you something. Not only am I not working in those fields, my kids aren't going to work in those fields. And if they did work, they wouldn't survive. So there's a hardworking community up there. And my suggestion is let's get them assimilated. Let's get them on the tax rolls. Let's get them as voters. Let's get them as United States citizens.
So then my last question for you. Now, so as I mentioned, the name of the podcast is Only in America. So of all my guests, I've been asking them to complete this sentence. Only in America, ...
I think it's only in America that we can find a center. That's what makes us great. Is that fact that we have all throughout our history have not allowed the far extremes to define who we are. And that's the hopeful thing for me is that sooner or later, I think I was reading a survey the other day that said how Americans just don't trust their government because it has become so extreme and so partisan and win at all costs. You're never going to solve a problem that way.
And I just think that the role and the responsibility and the leadership that the law enforcement community brings to this particular issue around immigration plays such an important role in reestablishing that center. So thank you.
All right. Well, you have a good day.
There's more about Sheriff Chitwood and his distinguished career in law enforcement at our website, immigrationforum.org, where you can also subscribe to Only in America. And if you're listening on iTunes, do me a favor, write a review of the show. I'm curious to see what you think. Coming up, my take on all things immigration.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
This is Only in America. I'm Ali Noorani.
In recent years, the California legislature has enacted a number of laws designed to intentionally obstruct the work of our sworn immigration officers, to intentionally use every power the legislature has to undermine the duly established immigration law of America.
That was Attorney General Jeff Sessions at the California Peace Officers Association in Sacramento. Responses to his speech and the lawsuit he filed against California ran the gamut. But the statement from the California State Sheriff's Association, who'd opposed one of the laws Sessions was suing California over, was, to me at least, the most interesting. The association said, "Sheriffs are caught in the middle of this challenging issue," and their statement went on, "Sheriffs do not wish to act as immigration police, nor are they, and we protect everyone in our communities regardless of immigration status." Or, as I told Laura Ingraham on Fox News, at the end of the day, the person caught in the middle is the cop on the corner. This week's edition of Time magazine puts a fine point on the fear facing immigrant communities. The magazine is on newsstands with a powerful cover story laying out the very human impact of the administration's unshackling of immigration enforcement. The article points out something that's very important, in fact. The architecture of all this fear is not incidental. It's the result of policy. Yes, that's absolutely true. But remember, the policy architecture that they're talking about was first created in 1996 through an immigration law signed by President Clinton. That architecture found its footing during the Bush administration and was fully resourced during Obama's time. These years of buildup, plus the Trump administration's unleashing of ICE, has, as Time magazine put it, led to an implied war on all undocumented immigrants. So from California to Florida, immigrant communities are worried. Fortunately, we have cops on the corner who want to keep everyone safe, regardless of immigration status. So even though I no longer trust political polling, since I am part of the establishment, it is my duty to share with you political polling. Axios came out with new data from SurveyMonkey, which found most voters in 9 out of 10 states that voted for Trump and have Democratic senators up for re-election this year support DACA protection for immigrants brought to the U.S. illegally as children. And majorities in every state think that undocumented immigrants working in the U.S. should be given a pathway to citizenship. In a separate poll, New American Economy, along with Target Point Consulting, polled Republican and conservative voters about their attitudes towards Dreamers. New American Economy found 80% of conservative and Republican voters support a deal to increase border security in exchange for protections for Dreamers. The poll also found that 86%, pause, let me repeat that, 86%, that's a lot of people, of Trump base voters support a border security for Dreamers deal. Look, there's a compromise to be had that balances Dreamers and border security. The president can claim a significant victory here if he wants to. But the president was in San Diego this week visiting prototypes of his beautiful wall that will either pay for itself or Mexico will pay for it. According to a CBS News poll, the majority of Americans continue to oppose a wall, even if it is big and beautiful. I'm Ali Noorani. That's it for this week. Only in America is produced by Emily Chow and Regina Medina. The executive producer is Kathleen Farrell. I'm Ali Noorani from the National Immigration Forum. See you next week.